They sent one ship, not a fleet, I think, and not a vanguard, not even an escort. One. When our long-range scanners first picked it up, my commanding officer laughed. Actually laughed. This dry, clicking sound that meant contempt in our dialect. The council representatives didn't even bother looking up from their briefing slates. A single vessel crossing into disputed space. Against our combined armada of 400 warships, 11 planetary garrison fleets, and the most decorated battle group in the hegemony's 300-cycle history. One ship. I remember the exact timestamp. 4/17/33, station cycle 9. Because I log everything. It's a habit my superior officer finds irritating and my therapist calls compensation behavior. I call it look, the only reason I'm still alive to tell you what happened next. Odd because what happened next didn't make sense, which not then. Not by any framework of military logic, species psychology, or tactical doctrine I'd ever studied. It still doesn't make sense. But I've stopped calling it madness. And here's what I know. The humans weren't confused. They weren't desperate, and they weren't making a mistake. They sent one ship on purpose. And by the time any of us understood why, it was already too late. This is my account. Plus, logged in full, submitted to no one because I'm not sure anyone would believe it. Timestamp, 4/17/33, which it begins here. The ship didn't announce itself. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Every species in the hegemony follows contact protocol. Transponder ping, identification burst, frequency handshake and standard. It takes about 4 seconds and it's functionally the difference between I come in peace and I'm a problem. The humans sent nothing. Their ship just appeared on the edge of the detection grid, running quiet, and sat there like it was waiting for us to notice. I noticed. I always notice. Which 4/17/33, and I was on the 3rd hour of my monitoring rotation, which meant I was also on my 3rd cup of teth, a beverage my crewmates describe as industrially processed regret, and which I can't stop drinking. A fact my physician finds alarming, and which I've filed under not my immediate concern. I was sort of logging ambient traffic patterns when the contact signature bloomed on my board. Clean, single, and impossibly calm. I flagged it to Commander Vreth immediately. Plus, he looked at the readout, looked at me, looked back at the readout. One vessel, he said. Yes, Commander. Human registry? Human registry. The silence lasted exactly 6 seconds. I logged it. Then Vreth made the clicking sound, the contempt sound, and went back to his briefing slate. I didn't go back to my station. I kept watching the contact signature, and I don't know what I was waiting for. Honestly, more ships maybe. A support formation materializing behind it, some tactical logic that would make the situation coherent. Instead, the ship just sat there, 7 light minutes off the outer marker, not moving, not signaling, not doing anything that made sense for a vessel that had just entered the engagement perimeter of 400 hegemony warships. My name is Sev Orath Keln. Was a junior intelligence analyst attached to the 12th Intercept Group. And I'm 4 years into what was supposed to be a 12-year commission, which means I've seen enough to know when something is wrong and not enough to know what to do about it. I've 17 decorations, all of them administrative. I've never, for what it's worth, fired a weapon in combat. I've never wanted to. I log everything. Timestamps, ambient data, anomalous signatures, which my commanding officer says I log things that don't need logging. TBH, he is probably right. But I've pretty much found, in 4 years of watching things other people ignore, that the things which seem least worth recording are frequently the things that later, in retrospect, turn out to have been the entire story. 4/22/09. The human ship still hadn't moved. I ran the registry query a second time, and partly to confirm, and partly because I needed something to do with my hands. The return was unambiguous. GCS Meridian. Honestly, Human Commonwealth Registry. Classification? Expeditionary. Plus, crew complement, listed as variable. Armament, listed as standard. Whatever standard meant to them, our intelligence files on human vessel classifications were, to use a technical term, sparse. The hegemony had been watching the human expansion for about 60 cycles, and in that time had produced approximately 4,000 reports, 9,000 analyses, and one official position paper, which concluded that humanity was a mid-tier emerging species of moderate strategic interest and recommended a watchful non-engagement posture. The paper was authored 40 cycles ago. The analyst who wrote it had since retired to an agricultural colony on the outer rim, which I found, for the first time, deeply enviable. 431:17, first contact from the meridian, and not a transponder ping. To be fair, not a frequency handshake. They sent a voice signal, compressed, standard compatible, lazy with the encoding in a way that suggested they'd done this before. Couldn't be bothered being precise about it. And when my translation suite passed it out, the message was 11 words. Hegemony Command, this is Meridian. We'd like to talk. No rush. I logged it. Then, honestly, I read it again. Then I read it a third time because I was certain I'd mispassed something. No rush. So when they were sitting 7 light minutes from the largest combined fleet deployment in the hegemony's Eastern Engagement Corridor, a formation that had, in the past 30 cycles, absorbed 2 full alien invasion fleets and a rogue AI network. And their opening communication was no rush. I flagged it basically to Commander Vreth again. He read it. He made a, in my opinion, different sound this time. Not contempt, something more like the grinding sound our species makes when we're recalibrating. Then he told me to prepare a full intercept analysis and walked off the bridge, which I took as a sign that he needed to go be privately uncertain somewhere nobody could see him. You know, I prepared the analysis. I think also made another cup of tea. I was going to need it. The thing about the meridian, the thing I couldn't stop coming back to, that kept interrupting my data processing with a low, persistent wrongness, was its size. It wasn't a small ship. I want to be clear about that because the way I've been telling this story makes it sound like the humans sent a runabout or a scout. They didn't. The Meridian was a significant vessel, cruiser class by our classification schema, maybe 600 meters bow to stern. Drive signature suggesting a crew complement of 2 to 500 depending on mission profile. That's a serious ship. That's not nothing. But it was one ship. And the reason that mattered, the reason I kept running the numbers even after I'd confirmed them 4 times, is that our intelligence files did have one firm piece of data on actually the human Commonwealth military doctrine buried in a 40-cycle-old reconnaissance report and flagged low confidence because the source was a third-party trader who may or may not have been embellishing. The data, to be fair, point was this. Humans don't send single ships into contested space. Not because their ships aren't capable, because their tactical doctrine, going back to their earliest documented fleet engagements, is built around collective action. Groups, which formations? The intelligence report described it as pack-based tactical coordination, which the analyst had meant as a mild pejorative, implying humans couldn't act independently, needed backup, were fundamentally dependent on numbers. Looking at the Meridian sitting alone in the dark 7 light minutes off our perimeter, and I started to think the analyst had missed something important. 4:58:44. Commander Vreth returned TBH to the bridge with the Fleet Admiral's adjutant, a senior officer named Res Mulin, who had the kind of face that communicates permanent skepticism regardless of circumstance. Mulin looked at the contact signature, looked at the voice signal transcript, looked at me for reasons I couldn't determine. "They're still there?" Mulin asked. "Still there, sir. No movement, no additional signals. They appear to be..." I checked the latest sensor sweep. "Holding well. Position. Waiting. Apparently, sir." Mulin was quiet for a moment. I could hear the ventilation system cycling. I logged the timestamp. 4:59:02. "Send a response, for what it's worth," Mulin said, "and Standard inquiry. Identify purpose of incursion. New identification of commanding officer and a pause. Ask them what they mean by no rush. I sent the signal. It would take basically about 14 minutes round trip at light speed, which left us all standing on the bridge together with nothing to do but not say what we were thinking, which was that a single human ship sitting calmly in the middle of our battle group perimeter was either the most tactically suicidal thing any species had attempted in recorded history, or something else entirely, and none of us had a name for the second option. I drank my teth. It tasted like burnt mineral coolant, with a strong note of questionable decisions. 5:13:58. Like, plus, the response came. Purpose of visit, direct negotiation. Commanding officer, Captain E, Reeves, GCS Meridian. As for no rush, we figured you'd need a minute to count us. We're just the one ship. Take your time. I read it twice. I read it a third time. We figured you'd need a minute to count us. They knew. They knew exactly what they looked like. One ship against a fleet. And they had anticipated our reaction with sufficient confidence to joke about it in their opening communication. Not defensively, plus not nervously. Like, well, someone who arrives alone to a crowded room and makes the first joke because they're completely comfortable being the most interesting thing there. I filed that observation under a new category I created basically for this contact event. Behavioral data, classification. Currently inexplicable. The category would fill up faster than I expected. 5:47. Mullen, authorized a communication channel. Not actually. A face-to-face link. Hegemony protocol required senior command approval for that, and the Admiral was apparently in a meeting that nobody wanted to interrupt. A voice channel only, with full monitoring and recording, which I was assigned to manage, transcribe, and analyze in real time. I positioned myself at the communications board with a fresh cup of teth and pulled up a blank log file. I had a feeling this was going to generate a lot of entries. The channel opened with a soft click and then a very slight, almost imperceptible background sound. A low, rhythmic hum, too irregular to be mechanical. It took me several seconds to identify it. Someone on the Meridian was humming to themselves. An idle, tuneless thing. The kind of sound a person makes when they're doing something routine, and their mind is partly elsewhere. Then a voice. Hegemony Command, this is Reeves. Good to finally be talking. Not we are honored by this contact. Not we come pretty much in peace and mutual respect. Not any of the 17 standard opening formulations that the Hegemony's contact protocols listed as appropriate for a first contact communication event. Just good to finally be talking, like we were colleagues who'd been trying to coordinate schedules for a while and had finally found a mutual opening. Mullen's secondary membrane flicked, our equivalent of a blink, but slower, more deliberate, the one we do when we're recalibrating a prior assessment. Basically, I logged it. Plus, Captain Reeves, Mullen said, in formal standard, you are kind of currently in a restricted engagement corridor of the Hegemony Combined Fleet. Please state the nature and authorization of your incursion. A pause. Then, incursion's a strong word. Plus, we filed a flight plan. You filed a flight plan with whom? To be fair, that's a fair point. Maybe we filed it with people who weren't in charge of this particular corridor. I'll have to look into that. Another pause. And in it, I could hear something in the background on their end, too faint to fully resolve. A voice. Like, plus, someone else. Then Reeves again. Sorry, my navigator is reminding me that we may have filed it with a transit office that the Hegemony dissolved 8 cycles ago. So, new plan? We're filing it with you now. Consider this our flight plan. Which one ship? One destination. Your command vessel. Purpose, talk. I transcribed every word. I underlined one ship. And I added a notation, stated with no effect of apology or concern. Cross-reference, behavioral category, currently inexplicable. Captain, Mullen said, You are aware that your vessel is presently outnumbered at a ratio of approximately 400 to 1. The pause this time was shorter. Yeah, in my opinion, Reeves said, which we know. That was all. No elaboration, no tactical justification, no claim of weaponry that might equalize the odds or diplomatic immunity that might neutralize them. Just, yeah, we know. Delivered in the same tone someone uses to confirm they've already read the briefing document and would like to skip ahead to the actual meeting. I stared at my transcription screen. 400 to 1, and yeah, we know. The ventilation system cycled. Somewhere behind me, one of the tactical officers shifted position. The Meridian sat 7 light minutes away, unhurried, its single contact signature steady, on the board. 5:52:34. I started a new log entry. Plus, I titled it, Things I Do Not Have a Framework for Yet. It was pretty much the longest document I'd produce in my entire military career. The next 2 hours were, strategically, quiet. Moulin went to brief the Admiral. The tactical officers ran continuous assessments on the Meridian that kept returning the same data. One ship, no support formations, no anomalous power signatures suggesting concealed armament, no signals traffic that might indicate a relay to forces outside detection range. By every measurable indicator, the Meridian was alone. I kept running the assessments anyway, not because I expected different results, because I needed somewhere to put the feeling that I was missing something, and data collection is, at minimum, a productive way to be wrong. I guess 7-11-22. The Admiral authorized a face-to-face link. I wasn't supposed to be in the room for that meeting. I was an intelligence analyst, not a command-level officer, and the protocol for first contact visual communication explicitly limited attendance to senior staff. But I was already at the communications board. I'd been there for nearly 3 hours, and nobody told me to leave. Possibly because in the concentrated focus of preparing the link, nobody remembered I was there. I stayed very still and logged everything, and the holographic display resolved to show the Meridian's bridge. It was smaller than I expected. Compact, functional, the kind of space that looked like it had been designed to hold more equipment than crew. The lighting was warmer than our standards, more orange than white. There were objects on consoles that served no obvious operational purpose. A small printed photograph affixed to a panel with adhesive, a ceramic cup with a handle, a mechanical stylus rolling very slightly with the ambient vibration of the ship. And there was Reeves. I honestly want to describe this accurately, because I think my initial description in my log was insufficient. Reeves was not large by human standards from what I knew of them. Medium height, the kind of face that had clearly spent years outdoors or in environments that weren't kind to it, lines that had been earned rather than accumulated. A sort of a captain's insignia on a jacket that looked like it had been washed many times. One hand on the edge of the console, the other. I noticed this immediately. Couldn't stop noticing it, resting loose and open on the chair's arm. Relaxed, which the posture of someone who had been in this room, in this kind of meeting, more times than they'd bothered counting. In my opinion, Admiral, Reeves said. Basically, just the word. No title, no formal address, like they already knew each other. Our Admiral, Seln Vorak Dai, 42 cycles of command, the highest decorated officer in the Eastern Engagement Corridor, blinked both his membranes at once. Captain Reeves. A pause that I measured at 3 full seconds. You came alone. We came in one ship, Reeves said. The distinction seemed to mean something, which I wasn't sure what yet. I'm compelled to ask, Vorak Dai said, what precisely you believe one ship accomplishes in this context. Reeves was quiet for a moment. In that moment, the stylus rolled a few millimeters to the right on the console behind them. I watched it. It shows you were not here to fight, Reeves said. You sort of send a fleet, the other side sees a threat. You send one ship, the other side sees a small pause, something almost like humor in the cadence, a question. And what question is that? Whether you're curious enough to answer it. I logged the timestamp. 7/19/45. I added a notation that I've since read back many times. They came alone because alone is not vulnerable. Alone is a choice. The distinction is everything, and I'm only beginning to understand it. Vorak looked at Reeves for a long moment. Then he said, "You have our attention, Captain." And Reeves said, "Yeah, that was the plan." What came next? The actual content of the negotiation, the thing Reeves had crossed 12 light years and 400 hostile warships to say, that came later. I'll get to it, but I want to stay here for a moment at 7/19/45, in the meeting room with the holographic display and the rolling stylus, and Reeves sitting with that loose open hand on the chair's arm. Because there's something that happened in the next 10 minutes that I've been thinking about since, and that I didn't fully understand until much later, and that I believe is the actual beginning of this account. Not the ship on the scanner, not the first signal, not No Rush, though all of those were pieces of it. At some point during the early exchange, so before the substantive conversation began, one of Vorak staff officers, a young tactical sort of analyst I didn't know by name, leaned toward the Admiral and said something just below pickup range. Whatever it was, Vorak shook his head slightly. The staff officer pressed, "Quieter." Vorak shook his head again, and this time the gesture included something I recognized as a stand-down signal in our rank language. I watched Reeves during this exchange, and Reeves couldn't have heard it. Reeves couldn't have understood our rank language. But something in Reeves's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, a slight change in where the weight was distributed, the open hand on, the chair's arm closing just fractionally. Then the sort of exchange ended, and Vorak returned his attention to the display. The staff, officer stepped back, and Reeves's hand opened again, casual, easy, like it had never moved, like they'd noticed, and filed it, and decided it wasn't a problem. Like they were tracking everything in the room and making calculations I couldn't see, and the calculations kept coming back to fine, continue, you're exactly where you want to be. I'm a junior, intelligence analyst. I log things other people don't bother with. And what I logged at 7/24/11 in the category titled Things I Do Not Have a Framework for Yet was this: the human is not unaware. The human has never been unaware. The human came alone because the human has done this math before. I don't yet know what answer the math produces. I need to. Outside, 7 light minutes off the perimeter, the meridian sat in the dark. Actually, patient. Singular. Which waiting for us to catch up. I poured another cup of teth, and it tasted terrible. I kept working. 9:04:17. The Admiral invited Reeves aboard. I logged it. Plus, then I sat with the log entry for a full minute before I could make myself move on to the next field, because the implications of it were considerable. An enemy vessel, plus a vessel that had crossed into our engagement corridor without authorization, that had refused standard identification protocol, that had by any operational definition committed an act of provocation, and the Admiral was inviting its commanding officer onto our flagship. Kind of for a meeting. In person. Commander Vreth had thoughts about this. He shared them, briefly and with considerable intensity, in the corridor outside the communications room, not knowing I was close enough to hear. The word he used was exposure. The word he used 3 times in a row was unacceptable. The word he ended on, after a long pause in which I could practically hear him doing his own recalibration, was unprecedented. Then he went back onto the bridge and said nothing further about it because the Admiral had decided, and Vreth was, whatever his private thoughts, a disciplined officer. I wasn't technically on any list of personnel authorized to meet the incoming shuttle. I was also, I think, not on any list that explicitly excluded me, and the specific corridor junction where the shuttle dock was located happened to be one I passed through regularly as part of my shift. So when Reeves came through the airlock at 10:22:08, I was there, logging ambient data, as I often did in that corridor, to be fair, for entirely routine reasons. but the shuttle was pretty much small. A personnel transport, 2 crew, and what looked like a single additional passenger. Reeves, no security detail, no aid. No diplomatic attaché or legal representative or any of the supporting personnel that hegemony protocol mandated for command-level meetings. Just Reeves, in like the same jacket I'd seen on the holographic display, carrying what appeared to be a standard-issue personal bag. And, inexplicably, a flat rectangular container about the size of a data slate. The receiving officer, a senior protocol specialist named Orev, who had been doing this job for 30 cycles and had the carefully neutral expression of someone who had seen genuinely strange things and learned not to visibly react to them, met Reeves at the lock and delivered the standard welcome address. Hegemony hospitality. Formal, safe passage acknowledgement. Pretty much the whole procedure. Reeves listened to it, nodded once, said, "Thanks," then looked around the corridor with the unhurried attention of someone who finds unfamiliar environments interesting rather than threatening. The flat rectangular container caught the light at an angle that made it visible for a moment. Dark surface, some kind of dense material, not obviously technological. I logged it under carried item, purpose unknown. I'd return to that entry later, which Orev led Reeves toward the command section. I followed at a distance that was professionally defensible. I was still logging ambient data. What I was logging, specifically, was Reeves. In my opinion, our intelligence files, and in the formal contact literature more broadly, there are approximately 6 different theoretical frameworks for predicting how a species representative will behave during a first significant contact with a military power that substantially outguns them. The frameworks range from aggressive posturing, an attempt to project strength in spite of, weakness, to extreme deference, to various positions in between that combine calculation with performance. Every species the hegemony had encountered across 300 cycles of expansion had occupied one of these frameworks. The frameworks were, in the opinion of most senior analysts, complete. Reeves didn't fit any of them, and there was no posturing. There was no deference. There was no visible calculation in the way Reeves moved through our corridors. No assessment of exits, no catalogue of security positions, but no mapping behaviour that species in uncertain situations universally exhibit. Instead, there was just attention. A steady, interested, non-anxious attention, like someone walking through a building they'd never visited but had expected to find interesting and weren't disappointed. Reeves paused at one point to look at a navigational display mounted on the corridor wall, a standard installation, nothing restricted, and studied it for maybe 4 seconds with that same quality of unhurried interest. Not memorizing it for tactical purposes, just looking at it because it was there and it was interesting. I logged behavioral note. No fear response visible, which not suppressed, absent. Cross-reference, purpose of TBH, single ship deployment, ongoing. 10:35:44. Look, the meeting room. I, to be fair, wasn't in the meeting room. I was in the adjacent monitoring station, which had full audio feed, and I was there because someone had to be there. And I was, at this point, the person most continuously engaged with this contact event, and therefore, I reasoned, the logical choice. I didn't formally request to be assigned. I simply sat down at the monitoring station. Nobody removed me. I put on the audio feed. I made Teth. I started a new log file. The meeting opened with the standard hegemony formalities. Admiral Vorak Dai and his senior staff, 5 officers in full formal designation. Reeves, alone, with TBH, the flat rectangular container placed on the table edge in a way that was neither prominently displayed nor hidden. "Captain Reeves," Vorak Dai began, in standard, "you indicated your purpose was direct negotiation. What specifically does the Commonwealth propose to negotiate?" Reeves looked at the table for a moment. Not pretty much, a hesitation, more like a brief internal consultation, the kind of pause someone takes when deciding where to start a story they know well. The hegemony has been expanding into what the Commonwealth considers a buffer zone for about 40 cycles, Reeves said. We've sent, honestly, 7 formal diplomatic missions. 3 of them made it to the border. None of them made it to a meeting. Commonwealth diplomatic missions were turned away, intercepted. 2 were impounded, and the personnel detained for a period that your records categorize as administrative processing, and that our people categorize as imprisoned for 8 months. A pause. Still no heat in it. Just the flat, patient delivery of someone reading out a list of facts that aren't in dispute. We tried the correct channels. The correct channels didn't work. So we tried this. This being showing up in one ship and being politely unavoidable. A brief pause. The one ship matters. I want to explain it, if that's all right. Vorak said nothing for a moment. I could hear the ventilation system in the monitoring station. Then, proceed. When we send a fleet, Reeves said, the message is, we can hurt you. Every, I guess, species in this section of space sends that message when they want something. We know. We've read the historical record. Which fleet deployment, force demonstration, implied threat. It's the standard language. It works. Sometimes. It also means that every negotiation starts with both sides calculating losses, because you can't send the "we can hurt you" message without the other side sending it back, and then you're in a conversation about damage thresholds instead of what you actually came to talk about. I was transcribing in real time. My hands were moving on the input surface, and my attention was fully on the audio. And there was a feeling happening somewhere in the center of my chest cavity that I didn't have an entry for in my log system, so I filed it temporarily under anomalous physiological response. Origin unclear. One ship says something different, Reeves continued. One ship actually says, we aren't here to threaten you. It says, we know you can destroy us, and we came anyway. Yeah, which means we think the conversation is worth more than the risk. It's not a military statement, it's another of those brief internal consultations. It's the kind of thing you do when you want the other side to know you're serious without making them defensive. The meeting room was quiet. It also, Reeves added, with something in the delivery that might have been humor, tends to make people curious. Curious people listen. 10:51:33. Plus, I looked at my transcription, and then I stopped transcribing for a moment and just sat there. One ship because a fleet starts a different conversation. I'd been in military intelligence for 4 years. I'd read, by my own count, somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 strategic analyses, contact reports, diplomatic incident reviews, and tactical assessments covering over 200 species interactions. Across all of that material, the answer to how do you approach a vastly superior force with a request was functionally universal. You either bring enough force to be taken seriously, or you bring the right credentials and hope the formalities protect you. The idea that you could walk up to 400 warships in one ship and have that itself be the message, that the mathematical vulnerability was the argument. I'd never read that. I'd never seen it filed under any theoretical framework. I wrote it down, not in the log. On the paper note sheet I keep beside my terminal, the one my supervisor says is an unnecessary analog system in a fully digital environment. The one I keep anyway, because some thoughts need to be written by hand to feel real. And I wrote, they understand that the math doesn't matter if you change what the math is about. I underlined it. I looked at it for a while. Plus, then I pretty much went back to transcribing. At some point in the next hour, Reeves opened the flat rectangular container. I couldn't see it, monitoring station, audio only, but I could hear the sound of it, a soft mechanical release, and then a faint rustling, and then one of the senior staff officers said something to Vorak in our own language that my feed picked up. What's that? Vorak didn't answer, which meant he didn't know either. Reeves said, I brought these for the delegation. Commonwealth kind of tradition. When you're asking for something, you bring something. We call it hospitality protocol. But honestly, it's just, we were raised to not show up empty-handed. More sounds I couldn't fully interpret. Then, from one of the junior staff officers, something that my translation suite categorized as an involuntary vocalization of surprise. "It's food," Reeves said. "Sealed, of course. We ran the full compatibility analysis before the mission. These should be chemically inert to your biology. No interaction risk. They're not going to do anything to you. They're just..." A brief pause. It felt wrong to have a conversation this important without bringing something. I sat in the monitoring station and listened to the sound of the Hegemony Combined Fleet's senior command staff handling food that an enemy officer had brought them across 12 light years because it felt wrong not to. And the junior staff officer's involuntary vocalization happened again. 11:06:52, which I wrote another note on my paper sheet. They brought food. They brought food to a military negotiation with a force that could end them. Because it felt wrong not to. I didn't underline it. I didn't need to. The substantive negotiation ran for most of the ship cycle. I won't reproduce all of it, partly because much of it's formally classified at a level that would generate significant paperwork if I included it in a personal account. Partly because the tactical specifics are less important than what was happening in the room that the tactical specifics were built around. What was happening in the room was this. Reeves was negotiating without threats. Not as a tactic, not as a strategic choice to appear unthreatening to achieve a concealed end. And as far as I could determine from the audio, from every behavioral indicator I'd access to, Reeves genuinely operated in a framework where the conversation itself was the goal, where reaching an outcome both parties could function with was worth more than extracting maximum advantage. Where, and this is the part that I kept returning to, the part I kept writing down and looking at and not fully understanding, where the other side's needs were part of the calculation. In hegemony diplomatic doctrine, what I was describing doesn't have a formal category. There's a concept in our legal tradition, Orveth Kyle, that roughly translates as acceptable mutual loss, the point at which both parties have conceded enough that neither can claim victory, but both can stop fighting. It's not a good outcome. It's a stable one. We've built most of our interspecies agreements around it. Reeves wasn't offering Orveth Kale. Reeves was offering something I kept trying to translate into our frameworks and kept failing. At 13:44:09, I finally wrote, "I think the word I'm looking for is fair. But I'm not sure we've a concept of fair that works the way they mean it." The negotiation look produced a preliminary framework. A border agreement, diplomatic channel establishment, return of the detained Commonwealth personnel from 8 months prior. Reeves asked for this specifically, mid-conversation, with the same flat, patient tone as all the rest of it, like it was a line item on a checklist, like 8 months of detention was something you mentioned and moved on from. Vorak Dai agreed. It was, by that point in the conversation, the easiest thing anyone had said. No, I mean, 15:22:31. The meeting concluded. I heard chairs, the sound of movement, Orev's formal departure address. And then, underneath it, barely audible but there, Reeves and one of the junior staff officers, a brief exchange that my feed barely caught. The junior officer was apparently one of the ones who'd received food from the container. They were asking about it, and what it was, where it came from. Reeves's answer was too quiet for my feed to fully resolve. I caught fragments. Long way from there. But you carry it with you, the things from home. Makes the distance smaller, which then the sound of footsteps. The corridor, the shuttle dock. I sat in the monitoring station for a while after the feed went quiet. The TBH meridian left at 17:08:03. No ceremony, no formation. The ship simply disengaged from holding position, dem-oriented, and began the return transit at a speed that was unhurried in a way that was, by now, consistent with everything else about the entire contact event. They had accomplished what they came to do and were satisfied with the pace of it. I watched the contact signature on my board until it cleared the outer detection grid. Then I looked at my paper note sheet, the 2 things I'd written by hand, and the transcription logs. The 17 knew, Entries in the Things I Do Not Have a Framework for Yet category. Commander Vreth, actually, stopped by my station at some point before the end of my shift. He looked at my board, at the empty space where the Meridian's signature had been. He was quiet for a while. I didn't log the duration. Some silences don't need timestamps. Your analysis, he said finally. What's your assessment? I thought about it. I thought about the flight plan filed with a dissolved office. I thought about no rush. Plus, pretty much, I thought about the food and Reeves's hand open on the chair's arm and the rolling stylus, and one ship says something different. I thought about a word I didn't have in my own language. I think, I said, they've done this before. Not with us. I think with someone else. And it worked. And they know something about how to talk to people that we've been missing. I don't know yet whether that should concern us or not. Vreth looked at me for a moment. Which do you think it's? I picked up my note sheet, looked at what I'd written. They actually understand that the math doesn't matter if you change what the math is about. I think, I said, well, that's the wrong question. Vreth left without answering. I finished my teth. It was cold. It tasted the kind of same cold as it did hot, which had always struck me as a unique failure of a beverage. 1752-14. I started a new document, not a formal report, not an analysis, something else. At the top I wrote, "The Commonwealth sent one ship." This is what I think that means. I worked on it for the rest of the cycle. I'm still working on it, and the Meridian is somewhere past the outer grid now, headed home, carrying, among other things, a preliminary border agreement, the coordinates for a formal diplomatic rendezvous, and a ceramic cup with a handle that I watched one of our junior staff officers accept when Reeves pressed it on them at the airlock. So with the expression of someone completing a transaction that made complete sense to them, and which the recipient had no idea how to refuse. For what it's worth, the road, Reeves had said. Plus, whatever that meant, I've filed it in the new category. I think I'm going to need a bigger document.